Good evening, everybody. It's Tonight Live with me, Patrick Christys. Now, talks between the British and French governments to settle a post-Brexit fishing row have ended in a stalemate, as Number 10 said it did not believe Paris would follow through on threats to slow down trade. The Brexit Minister David Frost, Frosty the No Man as he's affectionately known, spent about 90 minutes meeting France's Europe Minister Clément Beaune in Paris on Thursday. But, despite smiles for the cameras, the two sides remained far apart. France and Britain are at odds over the rights of French fishermen in the 6 to 12 mile zone around the UK shore and Jersey and Guernsey, with the dispute threatening to tip into a full-blown trade war. But should we just get on with it and go to war with France over this? Joining me now to discuss this is commentator and broadcaster Emma Webb and research fellow at the Bode Group, Benjamin Loughnane. Well, let's get cracking with this. I'm going to start with you, Emma. Where are you vis-a-vis war with France?
I mean, I know this is a bit of fun, and I know so many people would love to go to war with France. I mean, from 1066 until, what was it, 1815, after the Battle of Waterloo, we were almost continuously at war with France. So obviously we've got a taste for it. But if we're being realistic about this, of course we can't go to war with France. These are political problems with political solutions, and there are reasons on both sides of the channel why these things are not resolving themselves. And so as much as I think many people would like to go with France, it's a no from me.
It's a no from you. Benjamin, where are you at? Should we just crack on and nuke Paris?
Yeah, well, I'm curious about what the political solutions are to the tens of thousands of migrants that they're allowing to come over every year when we've sent them millions of pounds to solve it. We've done every single thing diplomatically to try and solve that issue. And they've still said, oh, non, we cannot do anything about it, you know, because they just like to look the other way. I see you're fluent. Indeed, I am, yeah. I'm a cosmopolitan, actually. And so we kind of do actually at some point have to say to them, look, there is the threat of peace breaking down if you continue to ignore what is in our interests and to not protect the channel, which we share, a body of water we share. And if you're not pulling your weight, then, look, that is the ultimate consequence. And, you know, I'm not necessarily suggesting we do go to war with France. I'm just saying we threaten them and then they'll probably surrender within 5 minutes anyway.
Well, I thought I was going to be the first one to say their flag didn't need red and blue in it. But there we go. Emma, just going to throw it back to you. Look, one reason for this hypothetical and, let's be honest, quite joking war that we're going to have with the French would be if they'd actually cost us British lives. And some would argue that they had. They nicked some PPE. They allegedly, anyway, stole around 5 million jabs. I mean, that will have cost lives over here, won't it?
Well, you know, as Douglas Murray has said, the French are always going to behave like the French, and they have behaved quite appallingly over the vaccines. They have... of course, of the issue with us handing £53 million to them to police their own beaches when they seem to be quite capable of kidnapping scallop trawlers without very much difficulty at all, but can't seem to deal with the 800-plus boats that have been coming across the channel in recent days. So obviously the French are behaving very badly, and there has been already the threat of a trade war rather than an actual war with France. But I think actually, you know, to be serious about this, it's important that we are, you know, not glib in the sense that if you recognise that the French are coming up to an election, Normandy and the north of France are strongholds for Marine Le Pen. Macron obviously has a vested interest in playing up some of these political tensions. There are reasons why these things are playing out, and I don't think that we need to necessarily sort of fall into hyperbole and talking about not only a war but also a trade war. I think actually that Frosty the No Man is probably going to be quite successful in the end with these trade talks with France, because in the long term it's a benefit to both countries to be good neighbours to each other.
Well, it is indeed. I don't think anyone's disputing that. But Benjamin, you know, look, let's say they do turn the power off in Jersey, and let's say that means that the hospital there has to run on a generator. Jersey actually has pockets within it of massive deprivation. It's not a fabulously wealthy area in part. I mean, that in itself could end up costing lives. And I suppose at what point, then, do we genuinely maybe threaten war?
Well, I think, you know, the peace that we have for France is predicated on the fact that we share certain things and we have certain agreements which we say we've got certain mutual interests and we'll cooperate. The moment they stop cooperating, that peace is fundamentally undermined. So we need to assert the fact that if that peace is not respected and those mutual agreements are not respected, then eventually the ontological end of that will be war. That's not necessarily saying we're going to turn around tomorrow and declare war and start sending tanks over to take over Paris or anything. It's just simply saying that our peace is predicated on certain mutual agreements and a certain respect between the two of us. And if they start to dismiss this and ignore this, then eventually things may escalate, and no one wants that.
No, absolutely. I mean, today, Paris, tomorrow, we sack Rome. But, of course, Emma, just to throw back over to you now, I mean, is there a limit to our diplomatic abilities? Maybe we're looking at this all wrong. Maybe we need better diplomats. Maybe we need people who aren't just going to throw 58 million quid to the French and say, can you police the channel? And they say yes, but actually they mean no. Maybe this is our failure.
Well, I think any country could always do with better diplomats, and it's true that all problems have a limit to how diplomatically they can be solved. But I think we're so far away from that. As I say, I think these are quite minor political problems. And, you know, in the history of our relationship with France since the Norman invasion, these are meagre skirmishes that are politically motivated, I think, from the French side. And I think they will resolve themselves. I don't think that these, in the grand scheme of things, issues that require diplomatic genius. If you look at other things that we've faced, yes, we could definitely do with smarter, more lateral thinking, clever diplomats. We always could. And going forward, of course, if you want to have a sort of repeat of the Pax Britannica, the old equivalent of global Britain, then we are going to need to be a bit more savvy about the way that we conduct ourselves internationally and to make sure that we are sort of have the upper hand diplomatically. But I think that we're realistically so far away from issues that are that severe. And yes, it is certainly true when it comes to...
What issues, sorry, just out of interest, what issues would have to be really severe for you? Because let's say it escalates again, Emma, we do have a full-blown trade war with France. Well, then when does that become a full-blown trade war with the EU? And what happens then? What level of severity are we talking about here for you for it to get to conflict?
I think an element of this is that we need to sort ourselves out at home first. So the issues surrounding the channel crossings, for example, yes, seems quite silly that we are throwing literally tens of millions at the French, who don't seem to be doing their side of the deal at all. But also, we've seen in the last week that it's our own border force that is refusing to follow through on the Home Secretary's instructions to turn boats back. So we need to get our own house in order before we start thinking about exactly, at what point we would stop seeking diplomatic solutions. And if really we're going to start talking about issues to do with appeasement in a modern contest, then we should really be debating China.
Well, yes, gosh, I mean, goodness me, yes, we absolutely should, but we can have you back on to talk about that next week, I imagine. But, Benjamin, when it comes to this kind of stuff with a trade war, for example, I mean, actually, that would have serious consequences over here, wouldn't it? What do you think that would look like? Because we said war with France, we were kind of joking, I think, for want of a better phrase, about nuking Paris. But, I mean, trade war is still war, isn't it? And that's actually pretty realistic. Yeah,
it's a sort of the Cold War of the economy, as it were. You're fighting in a way which is not necessarily active, but nonetheless you're still at odds with each other. You're not cooperating, you're not working together in the way that you would usually with an ally. I think that a trade war would probably be bad for both of us. We want to reach agreements, we want to have mutual cooperation, but at the moment the reason the French aren't engaging in that mutual cooperation is because it's quite popular in France to do a sort of Python-esque taunting of the English. And I think Macron knows that his poll numbers are reliant on having a certain contempt towards English people and the British nation, which plays well with the electorate. So he wouldn't be doing that if he thought that there would be consequences from our side, and that someone like Boris Johnson could turn around and have the gumption and the strength and the mettle to actually do something about it. But he doesn't. So he knows he can get away with it, and he knows his poll numbers can soar, and he can, blow raspberries at us from across the channel.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just congratulate whatever cameraman that we had there who found the most French boat in the history of French boats. It was called the Pascal and featured a French fisherman with a full ashtray in front of it. So, I mean, it was a ring of onions away from being absolutely the most French fisherman. But Emma, just to throw it back from you, even if you don't want war with France, which I know none of us really do want war with France, but are you actually very miffed about the way that the French are behaving? I mean, it's almost like they're not really our allies, isn't it?
It's almost as if they're not. It's almost as if they've never been.
Yeah.
But, this is the point, that the French behave like this. They behave in an underhand way often, and there are so many examples throughout history and also in recent months, over the last 18 months. The French behave badly. The French behave, surprisingly enough, in in the French interests. They are behaving in their own interests, and any country would. And we have to recognise that the French are, quite cynical, out for their own purposes, for their own domestic agenda, and quite rightly so. And we should also be, and we should recognise that going forward, this is just the way that it's going to be, and this is the way that the French behave. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go to war with France. Maybe we'll end up in a trade war with France, but that isn't the end of the world. No,
Benjamin, in a way, do you quite like Emmanuel Macron? I mean, he is very French. He does what he does, kind of act in the, or tries to, as far as I can see anyway, in the best, maybe more direct interest of his own people. I'm sort of sure the Gilets jaunes would complain about that. But when it comes to stuff like this, if I was a French fisherman, I'd probably be banging in favour of the guy,
Yeah, no, he's very good at being a populist sort of leader. He's the platonic form of the French president, as it were. That is exactly what they want to see in their leaders. But we don't have the same thing this side of the Channel, unfortunately. And if we did, hopefully we'd have a little bit more banter, as it were, over the things that were going on currently between the two nations in the Channel and so on, and we wouldn't be getting so much contempt from the French. But at the moment, it's an open goal for the French, and without that constant threat that we might actually turn around one day and say there are consequences for you constantly kicking sand in our eyes, they're going to continue to do it.
And presumably, Benjamin, just staying with you, for that very reason, you would not just roll over and go, look, this is probably about, roughly speaking, between about 50 and 100 French fisher boats, and we shouldn't just give them those licences and then we can all just be mates and crack on and deal with other things like the pandemic.
No, absolutely. I think these are fundamental rights. I don't think this issue is about fish. This issue is about the relationship we have with France and how much they can push us and how much they can get from us just by, taking a certain line. If we give in on fish, we'll give in on anything. And in such an important time, the post-Brexit years that are ahead of us, when we are reasserting our identity as an individual nation and our relationship with the continent, especially with France, if we give in on these small things now, we are going to give in long-term on everything. And we do not want to be a nation which gives in. We want to be a strong nation.
So, Emma, if we are hurtling potentially towards some form of trade war, there are certain steps that will have to go on before that actually occurs. And one of those might be something that we're actually threatening to do now, which is withdraw funding for various scientific programmes. So how far along the line are you willing to go on this, then? Would you be in favour of us doing that, a little bit of tit for tat before the inevitable kind of cold cod war, as it were?
I certainly don't think that we should be rolling over to this, and I think it's right that we should hold our own and not accept French threats, absolutely. Yes, in the next couple of weeks there will be more talks about this, and Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, has already been quite clear that we could take legal action against them if they continued with these threats. And in response to that, the French did agree to go on with future talks, which apparently have actually been quite positive, though not final. So I don't think that we need to be particularly pessimistic about this, but I definitely do think that we should stand our ground and hold our own, and not necessarily just roll over and accept whatever terms they're handing to us.
Do you think we will? I mean, a lot of people thought Boris Johnson was a very libertarian Prime Minister. We thought he didn't massively care about the big green agenda, for example, and hey, we were wrong about both those things, weren't we, Emma?
We've also been pretty unsuccessful in doing what we've said that we would when it comes back to turning boats and sending them back across the Channel. So, I'm not being excessively optimistic. I just think that we shouldn't necessarily be overblowing this particular situation, because we have to remember France do not want Brexit to succeed. They have domestic reasons for that. And as I say, they're coming up to another election. They have their own domestic political reasons why these things are being hyped up in the way that they are. Once that election has passed, I think the waters, pardon the pun, will settle, and then we'll be able to see slightly more clearly through all of the political fog that surrounds this. And I think that probably this is an issue that will resolve itself. The Channel issue is slightly different, but I do think that these are things that have diplomatic solutions, and that those diplomatic solutions are not served too well by hyperbole.
Well, but Benjamin, the last time I checked, the Brexit deal was partly drawn up anyway by a chap called Michel Barnier, who is French. And so therefore, when he's kicking off about potentially, or Macron is kicking off potentially about the fishing issue in the Channel, well, maybe he should blockade his own ports and turn his own power off if he wants to complain to the people who are really responsible for this mess.
Yeah, you do suspect that part of the reason why the French have certain aggressions towards the English at the moment is not just to annoy us or to curry up favour among the French electorate, but also to curry up favour with the EU. I think there's a grander sort of European anti-Brexit sentiment here. I think that's why it's so important that we don't give in and we don't capitulate to any of these things that they're trying to sort of push on us. And we turn around and say, no, we are assertive, we are sure about what we're doing in terms of Brexit, and we know it was the right decision and we're going to make a success out of it, and we're not going to be bullied or cowed by the EU or by France or by anyone just for making that decision democratically. That's why we need to push back on the fish, we need to push back on the migrants, and we need to push back on all of the things that the French do to sort of play with us, as it were.
Yeah, just very quickly, because in about 30 seconds I'm going to start getting shouted at massively in my ear for this. But Emma, I'm going to start with you. Who do you think wins the next French election?
Oh, gosh. I don't think I want to wager on that.
Oh.
I'm not very good at the predictions. I didn't think COVID was going to be a big thing.
Didn't think that, no. They said the same thing about the Spice Girls, though, as well, to be fair, and look at them.
I mean, if I had to place a bet, I think Macron does stand a good chance.
Benjamin?
I'd say Macron. I think he's playing it very well. He's doing the populist thing. He's got the aggressions against the English down to a T. He knows what he's doing. However, there is a lot of discord in French politics at the moment. People aren't happy about the vaccine mandates and the vax passports to go places. So we'll see. It'll be a very interesting election, but I do think Macron is an absolute master of manipulating the French people. And I also don't think the French people have the same sort of spirit as the British in terms of actually going out there and voting him out of office. They'll complain, they'll protest, they'll do their gilets jaunes, they'll throw a hissy fit in the middle of Paris, but when it comes to actually voting him out, I don't think they will.
Both of you, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'm sure everyone at home did as well. Thank you very much to commentator and broadcaster, the wonderful Emma Webb, and research fellow at the Bow Group, the equally wonderful Benjamin Loughnane. Now